Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Cozy Horror with me, Dr. Plague. We've got 5 more stories of kids in trouble, then I know you're just gonna love them. Let's start out today with a story about a very special object held by a very special child. So let's learn a little bit more about his lovey.
It was the only job I was allowed to have in high school. My parents thought that working in fast food would put me in contact with shifty adults who would only want to groom me, and that retail would hurt my self-esteem and take me out of the religious environment they had brought me up in. What it came down to was that they wanted me to be on call to watch their kids whenever they wanted me to. So, the career they gave me access to made a lot of sense. My older sister had been a member of the local babysitting service since she was 15, so I signed up as well. It wasn't all bad, but a lot of it was pretty terrible. I've been left with kids until the next morning, when the parents assured me that they'd be back by 9 at the latest. I've been forced to go out and buy groceries unless I wanted the kids to go hungry, and yes, with the kids in tow. I've been screamed at for letting the kids watch TV, been fired without pay for having them turn up covered in their mother's makeup after being in their room playing, and even had one of them prank call the cops and had to explain what had happened to them. On the other hand, I'd been to some really well-behaved households and sat for some really funny kids that were more than happy to just hang out and have a nice night. I have about 5 families that I babysat for on the regular, and the money I made was nice, but the real money seemed to be in the difficult clients that sometimes came up. Usually it was just troubled kids, or worse, kids with needy parents. I had taken a few of these jobs, and though the pay was usually above average, it always came with strings, special diets, procedures for home security. I even had one mother who told me I had to anoint her child before bed so the devil couldn't invade her. Those were all child's play, though, when it came to Norman. I'll never forget Norman, as long as I'll live. It was Saturday, and the agency called around 5 in the afternoon. I was home, pointing at my watch as I reminded my brother that I had dibs on the 5:30 to 6:30 TV slot, and I sighed as Mrs. Jackson asked for me. Tripp smiled. It appeared I wasn't going to be there to use the TV slots. I have some clients who are looking for a sitter. 27 Bridshaw Lane. Are you familiar with them? Nope, I said, holding the phone against my ear. Never sat for them before. The family is the Foremans. Their son, Norman, is kind of a difficult child. He's run off 4 other sitters that I know of, but his parents are willing to pay triple rates for the night off. Are you interested? I chewed on my lip and thought about it. Triple the usual rate would be nice, but problem kids were usually a handful. I asked about dietary restrictions or weird allergies, but Mrs. Jackson just told me that the parents would fill me in. Be there at 6, and good luck to you, girlie. I told my mom, and she said it would be okay if I went and sat for the night. Dad even said he'd give me a ride so I didn't have to ride my bike clear across town, and I was pretty grateful. The thought of riding my bike almost 3 miles, some of it uphill, was far from appealing, so I thanked him with a big old hug and went to get my sitting sack. The sitting sack was something that I'd put together the year before, and it contained a bunch of things kids usually like to be occupied with. Coloring books, stickers, those little plastic stick-on figures that you could get in different characters and properties, storybooks, jacks, a deck of cards, and my old standby for the really difficult ones, a little handheld game of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles variety. It was all inside a worn-out purse my mom had given me, a throwback to her hippie days, and once I had it and something sensible to wear, I came downstairs and told my mom I'd call them and let them know how late I'd be. Well, my mom called from the kitchen, tell them that we really like our daughter home before 11. told her I would and went to hop in Dad's old Ford truck, which was running and waiting. 20 minutes later, I was standing in front of 27 Bridshaw Lane, waving at Dad as he rolled away. The house looked normal enough, a ranch-style home in a brick red, and there were some toys in the yard and a little blue beetle sitting under the carport. It appeared to be a lovely house, but when I rang the bell and saw the man who answered the door, I almost wished I'd asked Dad to come with me. Mr. Foreman looked, well, off, I guess. Not like funny uncle off, but like someone who hasn't slept in a long time off. The guy looked a little crazy, a little unsure of me, but mostly like I was a life raft near the side of the Titanic. Oh, thank God! I was afraid the agency wouldn't be able to find one. Sharon, the sitter's here. The man was in a polo shirt and slacks, and his wife, who came from the back of the house in a frizz of red hair and sundress, looked just as manic as he did. She was putting in her earrings, and her other hand was trailing a small boy who seemed to be keeping pace with her. The kid, it had to be Norman, looked like Christopher Robin in the books I usually read to my siblings. He was tall for his age, bearing a dark brown bowl cut and a pair of footy pajamas that looked just about ready for the Salvation Army rag bag. In his other hand, the one not clamped to his mother's arm, was a stuffed bear that looked ready for the very same rag bag. The poor thing looked like it had done 2 tours overseas and was about to go for lucky number 3. One eye was hanging by a thread, one arm was trailing stuffing, and the fur was possessed of that smoothness that made me think it had survived many washings and many more playdates. "Thank goodness," said the mother, and she breathed it out like a prayer. "Hello, I'm Sharon, and this is my husband, David." We exchanged pleasantries, and then, though I didn't recognize it at the time, it felt like the mother steeled herself before introducing Norman. "This is our son, Norman. He's 5. Say hello to the nice lady, Norman." Norman, in typical shy 5-year-old fashion, peeked out from behind his mother's leg and lifted a single hand before disappearing again. "He's already eaten, had his bath, and he's in his jammies. Norman needs to be in bed by 8 o'clock at the latest. He isn't to sneak any cookies or jump on the furniture, and he isn't to give you a hard time. Right, Norman?" she asked. I'd heard a dozen mothers give a speech like this before, but this one felt a little off. The mother wasn't giving her child an implied or else statement. Sharon Foreman was almost begging Norman not to give me a hard time, and it put me on edge. "We'll be back around 10, David Foreman said. "That's at the latest. If there's any problems, you can reach us at the restaurant, Marco's on 15th. We'll be taking in a movie after that, but we should absolutely be home by 10 at the latest. We told the agency we'd pay you triple the usual rate, but if that's not enough—" No, that's fine. You have nothing to worry about. Does Norman have any special allergies or instructions or, anything?" Sharon Foreman looked down at her son, one of those unpainted nails coming up to her mouth, and shook a little as she looked back at me. "His bear, his lovey, don't ever let him be without it. It's very important to him, and bad things happen when he's without it." "Make sure he always has it," David reiterated. "Never let it leave his side." They looked so serious about the health of a bear that I just nodded and said I would. They left then, kissing Norman and telling him to be good, and then it was just the two of us. "So, Norman," I said, smiling, "what would you like to do? But he just walked off, the threadbare bear swinging from his hand. I shrugged, figuring he wanted to do his own thing, and went to call my dad and let him know I'd be done around 10. He said that was fine, told me to be safe, and That left me alone in this big old house with a very odd kid. I took some of the stuff out of my bag and called out to get Norman's attention. I shuffled the deck of cards dramatically, took out some of the coloring books and colored a couple of pictures, and after bouncing the ball and offering to play jacks, I just kind of gave up. It wasn't bad for the first couple of hours. Norman was quiet, moving around the house like a little ghost and playing games with his bear. I sat in the living room with my book, watching over the top of the pages to see what he was up to. He came around the corner with a pirate hat and spoke like a buccaneer to his bear, the little toy sporting a bandana. For 2 hours, Norman came running into the living room with different costumes, the bear wearing something similar. And for 2 hours, I watched him play pirates, knights, and finally cowboys and Indians. I was smiling at the little bear in his headdress when I heard the clock chime 8 of the clock. "All right, kiddo. Time to start getting ready for bed." Norman turned slowly, one eye still closed, as he extended his revolver to the bear in the Indian headdress. "But I'm not tired yet," he said, and it was the first time I'd heard him speak. His voice didn't sound like a normal little kid voice. His voice was deadpan, strangely calm, and his eyes were 2 intense pools of something I didn't have a name for. He was unsettling, to say the least. Sorry, buddy. Your mom was pretty clear on bedtime. Let's go brush those teeth and get ready for bed." Norman stared at me for a few more seconds, but he finally nodded and headed to the bathroom to brush his teeth. I was relieved when he left without a fight. Norman was pretty spooky. At the end of the day, however, he was a little boy, and I could handle little kids. Norman was probably 60 pounds soaking wet, and I had brothers that would have made up 2 of this kid. I had just turned back to my book, checking the clock as the minutes ticked by. And then I heard it come ripping from the back of the house. It rolled towards me like a wave of terrible fog, and I shuddered even as I jumped. "Where is he?" he screamed, and his voice was anything but calm and reasonable now. He came thumping from the back of the house, his breath coming in gasps as his hate-filled eyes bored into me. "Where is he?" he asked again. "Where's who?" I asked, standing up and putting my book down. "Who are you talking about?" "My bear! My lovey! Where is he?" My fear and confusion began to ebb away as I remembered what they had said about the bear. "Oh," I thought, "he's just lost his bear. We can find it and everything will be fine." I got down at eye level, the same thing I had done dozens of other times, and attempted to soothe him. "Hey, it's okay, sweetie. You probably just left it in the bathroom. Let's go search for it and see if we can't..." His head flopped back suddenly, making me worried he was having a fit, and then something started rising from his open mouth. I backed up a little, falling on my butt as black smoke began to pour out of him. His eyes had rolled up to the whites. His mouth hung limply open, and something like smog off a garbage fire was beginning to billow out of his open mouth. "Where is he?" he bawled, his voice hollow and deep. "Where is he? My lovey!" I backed away, not sure what to do. I'd dealt with some real tantrums before, but this was a first. The smog was beginning to fill the room, clouding my sight and making it hard to see. I coughed as I breathed it in, the smoke tasting like burnt plastic and fireplace ash, and I knew I had to get out of here. No, I didn't have to get out of here. I may not know exactly what was going on, but I knew that it wouldn't stop until I'd returned the bear to him. I ran for the back of the house, covering my mouth with my shirt, and as I did, the smog came after me. It was going to fill the house before long, and I needed to move quickly. I expected the bear to be in the bathroom, but he was nowhere to be seen. I peeked into Norman's bedroom and found a nice, normal little boy's room, but no bear. The smog was getting thicker now, and it looked like a fire was starting to engulf the house. I coughed. The smoke was choking me, and as I turned around, I saw Norman in the doorway to his room. The smoke was coming out of his eyes and his nose now, too, and the longer it went on, the less sure I was that I'd find it in time. "Where is he?" he bellowed, and I half cried as I pushed past him and headed for the front door. This was not worth triple pay, not even quadruple pay, but as I tried to open the door, I found the knob unturnable. It was like someone was holding it from the other side, and as he came slowly up the hall towards me, I backed into the kitchen. I was choking now, my eyes watering, and when I bumped into the table, I heard something slide off and hit the floor. It was the sit sack. It spilled out, but it was impossible to tell where all of it went. The smoke was so thick and my eyes were so watery that I couldn't have told you what was 5 feet in front of me. The only exception seemed to be Norman. He kept coming towards me, his body a living vessel for the smoke, and as I gasped for air, I tried to reason with him. "Norman, let's talk about this. Give me some time. I can't help you find Mr. Bear, but you have to get rid of all this smoke." "Where is he?" he bellowed, and it seemed to be the only thing he could say. My throat was aching from the coughing, my eyes watering, and my breath becoming harder and harder to pull in. I was going to die here. I was sure of it, and I tried to beg him not to kill me, but the smoke made speech impossible. Then Norman's foot came down on something, and he suddenly stopped. His head canted down, something flashing beneath the smoke, and I heard something that made me think I might be going crazy. There was a tinny, 8-bit sound from beneath the smoke, and I realized he'd found my trump card, the one I held out for the problem kids. His eyes rolled down like a pair of window shades, and he reached down and picked up the little white handheld. "Oh, cool," he said, in that hollow voice I'd come to hate. "Ninja Turtles." The smoke began to dissipate, and as he sat on the floor, his legs going crisscross applesauce, I just sat there in shock for a moment. I was speechless. It was unthinkable. I'd been minutes from death, seconds from passing out due to smoke inhalation, and my life had been saved by 4 mutant turtles and a cheap $5 handheld game from Walmart. I was sitting on the porch when his parents got home an hour later. I left Norman sitting on the floor in the kitchen, still plinking away at his game, and the parents must have suspected that something had happened. They both looked worried as they caught sight of me, and as Sharon went in to check on Norman, David sat down beside me on the stoop and sighed deeply. "It happened, didn't it?" He didn't need to elaborate, and I just nodded in response. "Here," he said, handing me way more than we'd agreed upon. I counted it later, and there was almost $200 there. He had clearly been relieved to find me alive and had decided to compensate me accordingly. "You don't have to answer right now, but if you'd like to sit for Norman again, we would be very grateful. It's very difficult to find sitters who are willing to come back for a second sit, but I think that Norman would like it if you came back again." I told him I'd think about it, and I did. You'd probably think that's weird, but $200 is a big motivator. The next time Mrs. Jackson called, about 2 weeks later, in fact, and asked if I wanted to sit for the foremans again, I agreed. I needed some money for an upcoming school trip, and they were still promising triple the average rate. I told myself that if anything weird happened, then I'd go outside, and this would be the last time, but to my surprise, the foremans looked a lot less stressed. Mr. Foreman looked like he'd been getting regular sleep, and Mrs. Foreman hugged me when I walked in. They thanked me for coming back, saying that Norman had been in a much better mood lately, and as I came in, I couldn't help but notice the source of his improved mood. He was sitting on the couch, the handheld game still in hand, and his eyes were glued to the screen. I babysat for Norman for another 4 years, until I went to college, and the foremans were always generous. Norman graduated to a couple of different things, but he always kept that little handheld, and I always brought fresh batteries in my bag, just in case. I never had another experience like I did that night, and I never wanted to again. A year after I went to college, the foremans showed up in the last place I would have expected. I read their names in the obituary section. They both died of smoke inhalation one night, though there was no sign of a fire. There was no sign of Norman either, and I wonder sometimes what happened to him. He's never reached out, and I've never gone looking. I hope wherever he is, he has fresh batteries.
It's always important to be careful with certain items. You never know what's going to set somebody off. Moving right along, we've got a story about strange symbols as opposed to strange dolls. Let's hear a little bit more about the odd items that appear on her grandpa's farm as we learn about mucklows.
I've been seeing them for most of my life, but the first time I remember asking my grandpa about them, I guess I was about 4 or 5. "Grandpa, what's that thing hanging off the fence?" Grandpa looked, and it was kind of weird, seeing his face fall like that. I've seen Grandpa stare down a mad bull more times than I could count. And when the man in rags had been living in the barn, Grandpa had run him off without even raising his voice. However, something about that thing that was hanging on the fence really scared him. "That is a mucklow." "What's a muckalow?" I asked, probably butchering it. This would have normally gotten a laugh out of my grandpa, but not today. Today he just stared at the little knot made out of sticks and leather bindings, like it was a declaration of war. "I'm not really sure, sweetie, but my grandpa always told me they were a warning and that I was never to go anywhere near them when I saw them." "But who are they a warning from?" Grandpa was quiet for a minute, seeming to try to find the right answer, and without my realizing it, he was starting to back towards the house and away from the mucklows in the back pasture. "I don't know, sweetie, but I know what my grandpa told me, and I've always believed him. He told me that the mucklow were warnings from the creatures that lived in the woods." "Like monsters?" I cut in. No, darling, there are no monsters in the woods. What lives in the woods is just something old. It was there before we were, and it still considers this to be its land. It's always lived in relative peace with us, but sometimes it hangs those symbols to let us know that it's conducting business or having a meeting or just doesn't want to be messed with. If you see those symbols, you must never go anywhere near them." We walked back through the field towards Grandpa's house, the cows mooing around us placidly, and I had enough time to think about it as we walked. I'd never been unwelcome in any part of the farm, but there were places that Grandpa said were dangerous. Some places were dangerous if you didn't have a grown-up, like the fishing pond or the hayloft. Some places were dangerous because of wild animals, like the forest or the boar pen, where Grandpa kept the big hogs. Those all made sense, but this was different. This felt like magic, and I don't know any little girl who doesn't like magic. "What will happen if I go over there?" I asked, remembering stories about people being transported by fairies to strange worlds or coming back to find that 1,000 years had passed. Grandpa turned me to look at him, getting very close so I could see how serious he was, and his eyes were absolutely without happiness or mirth for the first time that I could ever remember. "You would die, baby girl. It's important that you know that those things will kill you, and I'd be very sorry to lose you. You have to promise me that you will never go beyond those signals. Do you understand?" As I sat there and looked into his eyes, I could tell that he was absolutely serious. Grandpa liked to play jokes sometimes, but today was not going to be one of them. Grandpa was afraid that something would happen to me, and I nodded as I told him that I would never go there if I saw the signs. That seemed to make him feel better, and he sighed happily as he walked towards the house. "Now then, let's go see if your grandma's made any cookies." That was the first time I remember hearing about the strange little symbols, but it wasn't the last time I ever saw one. I've lived with my grandparents since I was about 2 years old. My dad was gone before I was even born, and my mom had gotten herself into some trouble with a new boyfriend just after I was born. Mom liked to use drugs, of a kind that my grandmother was never very open about, and when the police caught her with them, they had taken her away and taken me to foster care. Her new boyfriend was nowhere to be found, but Grandma and Grandpa were more than happy to take in their wayward grandchild. Grandma and Grandpa had a big farm down in Tennessee. They raised cows and sheep, a few goats and some pigs, and Grandpa even raised boars that he would let people hunt for a fee. They did all right, and I can remember many happy years spent on the farm. They never spoiled me, but they were never cruel to me either. For all intents and purposes, I was their daughter, and they brought me up in the same way they had brought my mother up, though I like to hope the results will be strikingly different. After that day, I began to look a little closer at the symbols that were sometimes found around the farm. They were these little Celtic knots that had been woven out of plant fibers and sticks, and sometimes even the hair of the animals. They were always gone a day later, and I don't think I ever saw one that was up for longer than 24 hours. They didn't just appear on the fence either. I remember one morning, Grandpa and I were walking to the cowshed to milk the cows when we came across one of the doors to the barn. Grandpa looked at me, and the message was clear. I didn't go near that barn for the rest of the day, and when I came out of the field that afternoon from picking flowers, I noticed that the sigil was gone. I was never afraid of the little symbols, but I was careful around them. It was like the snakes that sometimes slithered in on hot summer days that you could find in the cow fields. I never went in fear of them. Grandpa said that wouldn't do, but I was careful of them, and that's exactly how I was around whatever made the mucklows. I was careful. I obeyed Grandpa, at least until I was about 9 years old. One day, while I was out playing in the barnyard, I found another one of those symbols on the door to the old cowshed. The old cowshed was more of a barn than a shed, and I knew there was a way to get into the loft above it without being seen. I was 9 and very curious, and I really wanted to know what those mysterious things were. I looked around to make sure that no one could see me, and then I made my way around the back and onto the small barrel that sat at the back of the shed. If I stood on it, and nobody had bothered to drain it, I could go right up into the top of the shed, and I felt pretty smart as I did it. I was going to find out what these little things were before anybody else, and I couldn't help but grin as I slid into the dark rafters of the building. My shoulders ached as I lifted myself up into the rafters and pulled myself along the narrow beam that stretched across the length of the shed. It had probably been used to roost chickens at one point or another, but now it made a great way for me to move unseen inside the barn. The board was lightly speckled with old droppings, and I was sure that I was leaving a trail of dust behind me as I went. The board was between the roof slats in the tin roof, so I had to army crawl my way across it. I listened for the slightest sounds from below. I'd expected to hear weird gibberish or even maybe screaming, but really it was just the strange crunching sounds of someone chewing hard candy or eating rock candy. There was another sound too, something I couldn't quite place, but the closer I got to the middle, the more I began to realize it was the sound of fearful squeaking. It sounded like someone was chasing rats or something, and it made my skin crawl the longer it went on. As I came to the area in the middle, a little expanse between the roof beams, I looked down into the dark shed and tried to find the source of those noises. Even at midday, the old cowshed was pretty dark, and there was only one window towards the back. It wasn't bringing in a lot of light that day. As my eyes grew accustomed to the lack of light, I saw something down in the old hay, and it wasn't what I had expected. I could see something small and furry moving amidst the old hay down there, but it wasn't until one of them broke the surface that I realized those were the rats they had been hunting. One of them came up out of the hay like some kind of shark from the water, and even after having seen it, it's still something that's hard to describe. The closest I can come to is that it looks like a potato with teeth. Not like a regular potato, like a normal-looking spud, but like one of those potatoes that you see at the high-end restaurants, the one that's about the size of a double fist. It had a mouth full of bent-looking teeth, and as it shook the rat that it had in its mouth, I could hear the poor creature screaming as it writhed in pain. It was really tearing it to pieces, shaking it from side to side, and as the gore flew, I saw it let go for a moment, so it could chew at the rat's innards as it drug it out. The rat tried to escape, maybe figuring that now was the time to get away, but suddenly the thing turned and bit it again, digging its teeth in as it dragged out another mouthful of meat. From my vantage point, I could see others too, little potato things that circled around in the hay. There had to be at least a dozen of them, and I think that realization was maybe what told me I was in trouble. They weren't very large, maybe twice as large as the rats they were eating, but there were so many of them that they'd probably pull me down like piranhas in a stream. Suddenly I knew I had to get out of here before they resurfaced, and I began to make my way back slowly and meticulously. I was combat crawling, slow work to be sure, but when the board creaked beneath me, I realized I hadn't been going slow enough. I could hear their chittering stop below me, and I didn't need to see them looking at me to know that they were all down there, glancing up to see what was waiting in the rafters for them. It's strange to realize that you're the subject of interest for predators, and I could feel the sweat dripping off of me as I did my best to stay completely still. It was the same feeling I got when I lay under my covers and just knew that there was a monster hiding in the closet. These things sounded ridiculous to an adult, but when you're a kid, you just know that there's monsters waiting for you on some kind of instinctual level. You just know there's a troll or a dragon waiting to gobble you up if you go too far from home. Childhood is strange like that, and this moment was no stranger than any of the rest of it. They were staring at me for what felt like hours, but was probably minutes, before they went back to whatever they had been doing and left me to my own devices. I had to force myself to slow crawl on the way out, not daring to go very fast. And when my foot finally found the edge of the rafter beam, I was free to pull myself back to the ground, breathing a sigh of relief and knowing that I was safe once again. That relief lasted until I turned around to find my grandpa standing there, watching my descent from the rafters. I had expected him to be angry. I had broken the rules after all. But to my surprise, he just wrapped me in a hug and said that he was glad I hadn't been hurt. I felt him crying against my shoulder, and I think that's how I realized how much danger I had been in. If my stoic of a grandfather was openly crying, then I could have very well been on death's door in that cowshed. I started to ask him what they were and what was going on, but he just put a finger to my lips and told me to come with him. Silent as we could, we went back to the house, and there he told me what he knew. When I saw that mucklow and couldn't find you, I just knew that you'd gone into the cowshed despite what I'd told you. I can't be that mad about it. I know that children are curious, like I was curious when I was your age. Grandpa, did you see them too? He nodded slowly, like he was sharing some deep secret. I saw them once, when I was very young. I was about your age, maybe a little older. It was an early morning, and I had been sent out to milk the cows. I was heading out there with my bucket when I saw their symbol and knew that they were in there. It was the same cowshed that you just snuck into, and like you, I wanted to know what they were and why my dad was so afraid of them. I was a little taller than you, so instead of climbing into the roof, I hopped up on a barrel and looked through the window. I expected to see fairies or elves or something, maybe going about some secret business, but what I saw was nothing at first. We had a couple of milk cows, Clarabelle and Greta, and Clarabelle was standing off to the side by the door. She was making that bawing sound that cows always make when they're in distress, and her calf that she'd had a few days before was making a similar sound as it looked for its milk. I didn't know what they were doing at first, but as my eyes adjusted to the light, I soon found out. They were suckling at the cow's udders, their little teeth leaving long, jagged marks on the flesh. The cow was screaming as they did so. I was surprised, I suppose, because the next thing I knew, I had tipped backwards and was falling off the back of the barrel. I must have made a lot of racket, because as I sat up and rubbed my head, I saw something looking at me from beside the shed. It was one of those things, and even though I couldn't see its eyes, I knew it was staring at me. We just sort of looked at each other for a few minutes, neither of us saying or doing anything, and then it let out this strange keening noise and started chasing after me. It was small, barely coming up to my ankle, but it was so strange looking that all I could do was run. I ran flat out for the house, afraid that the others I saw would be after me too. I just knew somehow that if it caught me, my parents would never find my body. The thing would kill me in a matter of seconds. They didn't catch me, obviously, but I remember when I slammed that door behind me, my dad looked up from his morning paper and looked madder than hell. You didn't slam doors in my dad's house, not unless you were looking to catch a beating. But when he saw my face, he must have known what I had seen. He just scooped me into a hug and told me it was okay and that I was safe now. I tried to tell him what I've seen, but he just shook his head and said it didn't matter. He said they couldn't get me and that I was safe. I had to believe that he had seen them before. Especially, he acted. I can't imagine why anyone would let those things live so close to their house. But I suppose we didn't have much of a choice. They're older than the forest. They're older than anything. And they endure. One day, God willing, You'll have to decide what to do about them. But I suggest you make peace with them. They've seen so much come and go, and they never go anywhere. That was many years ago. Now I work on the farm that my grandpa tended so lovingly. He's been dead for nearly a decade, but I never forgot what he said about those little creatures that live in the woods. I still find the mucklow around the farm sometimes, and now I'm a little more careful to leave them alone. I tell my kids not to go near them either, and for the most part, they listen, though they've never told me if they've encountered the little devils. Grandpa was right about one thing. Whatever these creatures are, they're not going anywhere, and it's best to just get used to them. Otherwise, you might find out how sharp those teeth are as you go out for your morning milking.
Makes you look a little harder at some of the things that may be around your own home and wonder who might be leaving them. Moving right along, we've got a story about a childhood tradition where you find yourself at home alone, but you wonder what might be home with you. Let's hear a story about latchkey kids.
I believe now that I have made it to adulthood that I was given a key too soon. I was in the 3rd grade when my dad got a job at Maser Fiber Optics. He would be working from 2 till 11, making more money than he had ever made before, but there was a catch. Dad had always worked from 6 to 2, which meant that he would be home before 3 so that he could get me off the bus. Mom had a typical 9 to 5, something she couldn't change, and that left 2 hours where I would be unattended. 2 hours didn't seem that long, though, and the money was so much better than what he had made at the phone company that he decided to give me some trust. I wasn't a kid who lacked responsibility, and I didn't usually have trouble following rules, so they decided I was old enough to be trusted to let myself in and lock the door behind me. Just let yourself in, make a snack, do your homework, don't answer the phone or the door if someone comes around. Can you do that? I nodded, thinking it sounded exciting, and so I became a latchkey kid. It went pretty well for a while. I'd come home, make some Nesquik and bagel bites, do my homework, go watch cartoons until Mom came home and started dinner. It was a good system until I came home to find something was different. I came home from school, worrying about my math homework, when I found that the front door was unlocked. I put my key in, meaning to turn it so I could get inside, but the door just pushed open as it creaked into the quiet house. I felt a little chill run through me. The door was never unlocked. My parents were notorious about locking it, always had been, and as I looked into the seemingly empty house, I felt sure that I didn't want to go in there. Go inside, make a snack, do your homework, watch some TV till I get home. That was my mom's voice echoing in my head, and it moved me past the wall of fear that was building in me. I went inside, closed the door, locked the door, and went to the kitchen for my snack. I'd lived in my house my whole life, and in that time, I'd never felt unsafe there. It was my house. You're supposed to feel safe in your house, but as I walked through the living room and towards the kitchen, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It was that feeling I felt sometimes when I got up to use the bathroom in the middle of the night. The feeling of monsters watching me. But it was the first time I'd felt it in the daytime. Something was watching me. Something unfriendly. And as I moved into the kitchen, I saw something move out of the corner of my eye. It was gone when I looked, but I was pretty sure it had been there. I shrugged it off at the time, though, and went to get my chocolate milk and chips. I was scared, but I was also 8. When you're 8, it isn't uncommon to jump at shadows or think there might be ghosts or something. You know it can't be real, but that doesn't stop it from making you scared. I took the powder out of the cabinet, took the milk out of the fridge, and spooned it into my glass as I prepared to mix it. I had the milk up, ready to pour, when I saw something reflected in the side of the glass. It wasn't exactly the reflection of a person, but as the milk slowly sloshed into the cup, I saw something lumpy and ill-defined peek at me from the door of the kitchen. I couldn't tell what it was, and when the milk spilled over the rim and onto the countertop, I almost dropped the jug. I couldn't tell what it was, and when the milk spilled over the rim and onto the countertop, I almost dropped the jug. I managed to get the paper towels before the milk spilled onto the floor, but when I peeked at the door, no one was there. I put my chips in a bowl and got my homework out of my backpack as I went to set at the dining room table. Unlike usual, I sat with my back to the door to the backyard. If there was something here, something I was becoming pretty sure there was, I wanted to be able to run if the time came. As I bent over my work, I kept seeing something peek around the edge of the kitchen door. It was always gone when I looked up, but not quite. It was like catching a kid peeking around a corner who pulled his head in just a little too slowly, and I almost imagined that I could hear whoever it was giggling when I almost saw them. My teeth were chattering, and I'll never know how I stopped myself from crying, but somehow I kept my cool as I worked through my math homework. It was the most scared I had ever been in my entire life, even more than the time I had snuck into the living room to watch scary movies, and I was having trouble finishing my math. Who could focus on fractions when something was in your house, watching you? I was just scribbling now, barely paying attention to what I was writing. I was more interested in trying to see this thing that was stalking me. I couldn't catch more than a glimpse, but it was bald and looked fat. It had no neck. Its head and shoulders were simply smooth mounds of fat, but it was the eyes and the mouth that scared me the most. Its eyes were little more than dark, piggy circles. There was no white to them. They looked like doll's eyes as they stared at me. And the mouth was drawn up in a grin. The lips were wet. The teeth were shiny, like the thing kept running its tongue over them constantly. The eyes, despite having no real color other than black, looked hungry, and the mouth was like that of a wolf in one of the cartoons. He was another big bad wolf just looking for a pig to gobble up, and I was the one he had found at home. I might not know what these fractions meant, but I had figured out one thing. I'd figured out that I had to get out of here. Whatever it wasn't a monster or a boogeyman. That thing was human, and the longer I sat there, the more I could smell it. It was giving off a smell like my Uncle Tom did at Christmas sometimes. It smelled sweet and sour and a lot like old sweat. Something I would later learn was skin expelling liquor. As a kid, I just knew it smelled bad, and I wanted to get away from it before it decided to gobble me up. I thought and thought, trying to find some reason why I would need to go outside. Then I saw the trash. It was full, the empty biscuit can sitting on top like an old snakeskin. That's when I got an idea. The garbage was one of my chores, as long as there wasn't any glass in it, so after cleaning up my homework, I went to the can and started taking the bag out so I could take it outside. I headed for the back door, knowing it was watching me, and when I opened the back door, I heard it, heavy footsteps running after me. I slammed the door and dropped the bag, running for the fence that separated the front and backyard. I heard it hit the door, heard it trip over the bag, and I heard it fall onto the back porch, but I was already around the house and heading for the neighbor's house. If it had been any other day, I would have kept running, looking for someone who was home, but I saw the Staub's car in the driveway and knew that they were home. I heard the gate open and close, but I was already hammering on my neighbor's door. I heard someone drop something in the kitchen, heard Mrs. Staub come hurrying to the door, and out of the corner of my eye, I could see the thing coming around my house and towards the neighbor's house. I pounded even harder, wrenching at the knob, and when Mrs. Staub opened the door, I shot inside and yelled for her to close it because something was after me. She looked up, and she must have seen something, because she slammed and locked the door. Then she called the police, and after that, she called my mom. The police beat my mom home, but only just. I told Mom what I'd seen, told her something had been stalking me in the house, and how the door had been unlocked when I got home. She reassured me that it was fine, that it was probably nothing. She said it was probably just my mind playing tricks on me, but Mrs. Staub told her that nothing had been playing tricks on my mind, and she had seen it too. It was a fat, naked man who tried to come right up on my porch, and I'll testify to that before the throne of God. Mom was very confused, and what the police discovered didn't help matters much. They found a large man, one with very little neck, hiding in my closet, as if he expected me to come back after he had chased me out of the house. They didn't find any ID on him for obvious reasons, but they found his clothes folded neatly in the backyard underneath my mother's rose bushes. Mom told me later that he had a record of doing stuff with kids, but that this was the first time he had escalated into something like this. I'm thankful that they got him before he could actually hurt a child, but he was responsible for the scariest day of my life. After that, my mom asked my aunt to come and meet me at the house when I got off the bus and to sit with me until she got home. That kept on until I was in middle school, and Mom decided I could probably look after myself again. I still think about that day a lot, and it's probably why I kept my kids in after-school care for as long as I did.
As a former latchkey kid myself, that was always a fear of mine, coming home alone. Let's move on from keys to chalk, as we explore a story about chalk drawings that become a little too real. Let's delve into the Chalk Man.
Summertime in the cul-de-sac was the time of year we all looked forward to. 3 months of no school, days spent running the sidewalks and riding bikes, and the familiar sound of the ice cream truck a couple of times a week. We were all just middle-class kids, and those without older siblings were under orders to stay with a group if they went out. We lived in those halcyon days when you didn't come in until the streetlights came on, and Mom was only worried when something came out in the paper about stranger danger or an abduction. The street I lived on had about 12 families, and all of them had kids. Me and Mikey Castro were best buds, and had been since first grade. There were usually enough kids on the road, riding bikes or shooting hoops, to get a game of stickball or soccer going if you wanted. Sometimes, if their parents were cool with it, we'd play touch football in someone's yard, or I'd drag my radio flyer wagon out of the garage and we'd load it with plastic guns and play war. Most of the kids came in pairs to play the game of the day, pairs or triples or even quads, but everyone on the block had someone or several someones. Solo kids stood out like a sore thumb, and we all usually chummed together. I tell you all this so I can tell you that Robbie was odd by the standards of the neighborhood. Robbie didn't have a best friend, and I'm not entirely sure that he had friends of any sort at all. He was a skinny kid, rail thin, my mom would have said, with big, thick glasses and a mouth made for frowning. He never joined in on our games, and we never really offered. We weren't unfriendly kids, far from it, but Robbie didn't feel right. I know how that sounds, but a weird kind of haze seemed to hang over Robbie. It always reminded me of the stink lines around Pigpen in the Peanuts cartoons, but this one felt more like TV static. It was like a low background sound that hung around him, and if I spent too much time around him, I always felt like I had a headache coming on. He used to draw on the sidewalk with colored chalk, and we all joked that his dad must bring back the defective sticks from the chalk factory where he worked. No matter the temperature, no matter what the season, Robbie was out there drawing on the sidewalk. It was the summer of '92, and McGhee had a new super soaker. He wanted to do a water war, so all of us with guns showed up to play. I had a couple of water pistols from Easter, and Stevie Westers had 3 of those big super soakers that were popular the year before. He and his 2 brothers took them, and some of the other kids had ragged collections of water pistols and water balloons. There were about 11 of us in all, and we divided into teams as fairly as we could. The opposing side had more guys, but one of them was Davy Michaels, and his club foot kind of held him back from running. We were soaking each other in lukewarm water when I heard someone yell in frustration. I looked up to see Robbie shaking his wet arm, scowling at 2 of the Westers brothers who had soaked him with their guns. "What are you doing? You'll erase him! Get away from here! This is my sidewalk! Mom said so!" Some of us stopped squirting each other, moving closer as he brandished his piece of chalk like a dagger at the Westers brothers. They were backing away too, like whatever he had might be catching, and he went back down to fix the chalk drawing that they had ruined with their water guns. I approached Robbie, meaning to apologize, but he stood up and brandished his chalk at me again. "Go away! This is my sidewalk! Go play on your sidewalk!" I laughed. "Robbie, the sidewalks are for everyone. You can't own a sidewalk." "Can too," he belted. "Can too. My mom says so. This sidewalk's in front of our house, and it's mine." I took a step forward, trying to calm him down, but then I saw what he'd been drawing and recoiled a little. For a chalk drawing, it was very expressive. I would later think of cave paintings or early primitive drawings, but this was far more savage. It was a tall man with long frilled arms and long spindly legs. His chest was equally long, stretching in many colors as it tapered up to a rounded head with a pair of stubby horns on it. The eyes were spirals, the swirls changing colors as well as they swirled into the irises. Even wet, it looked very formidable. "What is that?" I asked Robbie, and he must have heard something in my voice. He grinned. "That's the chalk man. I draw him all the time. He comes to me at night and tells me that if I don't, he'll get me. So I draw him everywhere, on the sidewalk, on the carport, even on the back patio." I shook my head, turning to go, but I heard him say something else, and it made my blood run cold. "I put him out here because he likes to watch you guys." "What?" I half whispered as I turned around. "What did you say?" "I said he likes to watch you kids while you play. Someday, when none of you are paying attention, he'll grab one of you and drag you into his little world and gobble you up. That's what he says, anyway." He shrieked again when I started spraying the chalk drawing. I couldn't have told you why I did it, but I felt certain that it needed to be done. This thing needed to be gone forever. And as it started to fade, I heard my squirt gun hiss as it went empty. I moved away slowly, Robbie still crying as he yelled at me for ruining it. And when Mikey came over to see what was going on, I found I couldn't look away from the spot where Robbie was fixing that horrid creature. "What was that about?" Mikey asked, Robbie still shooting me murderous looks. I tried to find the words for it, but I was unable. "I don't know. He said something I didn't like. It made me feel..." I chewed my lip, trying to find something to describe it, and coming up short again. "Bad. Really bad." The water war was starting to wind down now, most of us on our 3rd or 4th tank, and we were all soaked and shivering. "Come on," Mikey said. "I just got a new Super Nintendo game. We can dry off, and you can borrow some of my clothes." I nodded and allowed myself to be pulled away, but it was hard to look away from that hunched figure as he worked over the chalk drawing of his monster. We spent the afternoon playing a new spaceship game that he had gotten. I can't remember the name, but it was fun, and I was shocked when I looked out and saw that it was getting dark. The streetlights would be coming on now, and my mom would be angry if it got dark and I wasn't home. Mickey asked if I wanted to ask his mom to drive me, but his house was only a block down from mine. If I run, I can make it, I told him, and headed off towards home. The afternoon had gotten away from me, the sun riding low, and the night was fast approaching. I'd have to run if I intended to make it in time, but as I ran down the path towards the sidewalk, I stopped as I saw something that I had hoped to avoid. Stretched across the sidewalk, the multicolored chalk very bright, was the Chalk Man. He was even bigger than he'd been earlier, his arms seeming to twine around the fence posts, and I hopscotched over and around him as I took off for home. I was going to be late if I didn't all but fly down the pavement. I hadn't gone very far, though, when I saw another Chalk Man, just as large as the last. His mouth was open, revealing teeth as sharp as knives. A mouth that size would have no problem gobbling me up whole. I ran around this one too, but it wasn't the last. They seemed to be everywhere, and Robbie had been busy indeed. The Chalk Man was rising and writhing across the concrete. His mouth opened and closed as I ran, those gnashing teeth going up and down as my fervent strides bore me on. It was filled with the terror of bedroom closets and growls beneath beds. These chalk drawings made me feel the way that strangers sometimes did, the way I felt when I listened to a scary story, the way I felt when I was outside at night. When I tripped, my cry had nothing to do with the way the pavement ate up my hands and knees. I thought I must have caught the edge of the sidewalk in my haste, but as I looked back, I felt my neck hair stand up. A single chalk hand, the purple claw looking huge and cruel, had risen up to grab my ankle as I ran. The Chalk Man was even now rising from the pavement, its gnashing teeth chomping at my ankle. It nearly had me, too. I was so surprised to find a chalk arm rising from the concrete. This was no cartoon. Things like this didn't happen in the real world. It had dragged me halfway to that gaping maw before I realized I wasn't dreaming after bashing my head on the sidewalk. I pulled and pulled hard, but his hands were strong. He dragged me back, more of him rising as he yanked at me, but it seemed fate had other ideas. He had grabbed not the whole ankle, but my sock, and as his hand slipped on the fabric, I was up and moving before it could latch back around it. I was running, dodging around other chalk drawings, and when I saw my house coming into view, I breathed a little easier. That was until I saw the Chalk Man outside my own gate. He was already rising like a blighted weed from the pavement, and I knew I couldn't get around him. I sidestepped into the neighbor's yard, and that was when I saw it. His hose was coiled around the spigot, and I reached for the nozzle as the shadow of that thing fell over me. It was rising, huge now, coming up, and as I unwound the hose, I watched as the water hit it, the Chalk Man seeming as surprised as I was. I stepped back, some of its color fading, and as I pelted it with water, the chalk began to run into the gutter. He was melting like the Wicked Witch, and as he fell away to nothing, I turned off the hose and ran for home. I came in panting, and any anger my mother might have had at me being late was washed away like the Chalk Man. I told her that I felt like someone had been trying to snatch me, and she made the usual sounds about people being watchful. She fed me, and she told me to get ready for bed, but I knew there wouldn't be any sleep for me tonight. How could I sleep with the image of that chalk demon running through my head? For the next several nights, I had bad dreams about the Chalk Man. In my dreams, I didn't get away. In my dreams, the Chalk Man dragged me across the pavement, and the last thing I saw before I woke up was him pulling me into his mouth. After that night, I didn't see any more of the sidewalk drawings. Some people in the neighborhood had complained, and Robbie was only allowed to draw them in front of his own house. His parents got fined, I heard, and his dad grounded him from drawing for a week. I assume he still did, since the chalk man never got him, but the chalk man never darkened our sidewalks again. I can remember, on the days when I found myself close to the madly scribbling boy, that the chalk man still seemed to move, but it could have just been the heat shimmer. These are but the rememberings of a child, but they're so vivid that I often wonder how much is speculation and how much truly happened.
One more story, and then it's going to be time for So Long. Let's go out strong with another trip to the Blacktop for more strange tales of strange chalk. Let's hear a story about the Blacktop Nightmare.
I don't know if this actually happened or not, but it's something I dream about sometimes. When I was in grade school, my family lived in a large apartment complex. My parents were not doing well, I guess. My mom was a cashier at a grocery store, and my dad worked at a gas station. They weren't bad parents, not by any means, and I remember a lot of happy times in our little apartment. We had Christmas mornings and movie nights and a lot of weekends spent on the couch with Dad watching cartoons. Dad worked nights, so I usually spent a few hours in the morning with him before he went to bed, and I spent my evenings with him and Mom before I went to bed. The apartment complex we lived at was big, with lots of kids to play with and places to explore. But the best feature was the blacktop basketball court that seemed to stretch on forever to my 5-year-old mind. It started near the front of my building and went all the way to the dumpster where Daddy took the garbage. I drew hopscotch boards out there. I played basketball with some of the other kids. And the blacktop generally became whatever we needed it to be. It was our play field more days than not, and we never thought about it much outside of what games we would play that day on it. I remember getting off the bus and finding the chalk, but it's also in that strangely dreamy way that little kid stuff sometimes happens. I was walking home, wondering if I had any chalk left to make a hopscotch board, when I saw something in the ditch across from the complex. It was soggy looking, but we had learned a while ago that sometimes the soggy boxes fell out of the trucks, and they had stuff in them. The year before, my friends and I had found some old coins in a lockbox that was next to the road, and we traded them for ice cream. Another time, we found a suitcase full of adult clothes that we used to play house. The box was floating on top of the old puddle water, and I found a stick so that I could nudge it over to the side of the ditch. I gasped. It was a box of chalk. It wasn't colored chalk. I had some stubs left from a big box I'd gotten for my birthday, but a box like the teachers used at school. The box was ruined, but the chalk was fine, and I scooped it up and took it with me. My friends were just getting off the bus from their school, and when I held up the chalk, they all cheered. Most of our parents were making it paycheck to paycheck, so things like sidewalk chalk and new toys usually took a backseat to clothes and food and shoes. "What should we do?" Randall asked, as we came into the complex's stairwell. "We could draw a comic," Mimi suggested. "Or a hopscotch board," Kelsey said. "Or make an obstacle course with these things that you can jump over and move around," Dwayne piped up. "We can do all of that," I said. "We've got until dinner time. That's loads of time." To us, the 4 hours until dinner seemed like an eternity, and the afternoon could hold all kinds of secrets. We put our backpacks in our houses and headed to the blacktop. There were a few other kids there already, jumping rope or shooting baskets, and I divvied up the chalk amongst us. Between me and Mimi and Randall and Dwayne, Kelsey, Rebecca, Kelsey's sister, and Carter, another friend of ours, there was enough for each of us to have 2 pieces with 2 left over. The chalk was regular school chalk, not very big or sturdy, but I remember thinking that it was something special. It was the way the light hit it, I think. When you held it up, it just seemed special somehow, like God had sent it just for us. Dwayne and Carter and Randall set about making an obstacle course, while Mimi and I lay in the shady part of the court and drew characters. It was a little cooler there, the concrete warming our fronts as we drew, and the afternoon slipped on as the shade from the tree slipped farther and farther across the blacktop. We chased it, drawing characters on the hot top as it cooled, and watching Kelsey and Rebecca draw endless grids that they never seemed to jump in. That was pretty normal for them, actually. I think they enjoyed drawing the boards more than they enjoyed playing hopscotch. And as our characters went about their adventures, we heard them arguing over rules. It was getting on in the afternoon by the time they finally started jumping, and that was when the trouble started. Dwayne and Randall had a pretty good obstacle course set up, even if it just consisted of jumping over and around lines on the ground, and Carter had decided to watch, sitting in the grass and keeping time. He would watch them go, keeping time on his old Seiko watch, and tell them how long it had taken them to finish. Dwayne was a little faster, but only because Randall was getting tired. We had sketched across the blacktop by this point, and had even started squatting so we could draw on the parts where the sun was still too hot to lay on. Kelsey and Rebecca had finally decided on some rules for their hopscotch game, and Kelsey was getting ready to go first. I didn't see it when it happened, but I did hear the rock hit the blacktop before she started jumping. Someone called Rebecca's name, and I guess she turned to see who it was because she didn't see it either. I was listening to the chalk of Kelsey's shoes on the pavement. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then suddenly they stopped. I didn't think much about it, not until I heard a sad little voice not far behind me. "Kelsey?" I turned around, just finishing on the teeth of a really cool dinosaur, and saw Rebecca looking around in confusion. "Where's Kelsey?" I asked, standing up from where I'd been squatting. "I don't know," Rebecca said, looking around. "I turned to say hi to Mary Beth, and she was gone when I looked back." I glanced around, but I didn't see her either. There weren't a lot of places to hide here. It was just blacktop, and I can't imagine where Kelsey could have gone so quickly. "Could she have gone home?" I asked Rebecca. "I don't think so," the little girl said. "Well, why don't you go see if she's there and let us know? If she comes back, I'll tell her that you went looking for her." Rebecca nodded, clearly a little freaked out, and left. The boys seemed to have run themselves out because Randall was laying on the pavement and panting like a dog. That gave me an idea. I took my chalk and went to draw his outline. I remember thinking that the chalk had barely been worn down at all, and thought again how special it must be. Randall looked at me as I started to draw, laying still so I could get a decent outline. It was like one of those shows where the police were standing around a chalk outline on the ground, though I didn't know what it meant just yet. "Do me next," Carter said, coming to lay down not far from Randall before hopping up and saying the pavement was too hot. He was still looking for a good spot when I finished the outline, and something astonishing happened. I had sat back to see it, and Randall was getting ready to sit up when he suddenly dropped into the concrete, like he'd fallen into a hole. I knelt there, just looking at the spot for what felt like hours, trying to make sense of what had happened. "Hey, are you going to come do me too?" Carter said, sitting up and looking at the spot. "Hey, where did Randall go?" I fell onto my butt, looking at the spot, and soon I was running for home. My mind was racing, trying to find some reason why this would have happened, and I was equally as afraid that I would be in trouble. I'd made the outline, and if I couldn't make Randall come back, then they'd blame me. All I could think to do was go home. Home was like base and tag. Once you got there, you were safe, and nothing could get you. I could hear the other kids calling my name, but I needed to feel safe more than I needed to talk to them. Mom asked if something was wrong when I came running in, but I didn't stop. I went to my room and closed the door, sitting under the window as my mind raced. I was going to be in so much trouble when the other kids told an adult. It was all my fault, but I wasn't sure how. What had I done? How had I done it? Would Randall ever come back? I could see it getting dark behind me as the afternoon petered out, and when Mom called my name, I came slowly out of my room. "Hey, sweetie, are you okay? You came in so suddenly." "Yeah," I said, trying to play it cool. If they hadn't told Mom, then maybe no one had thought I had done it. "Well, dinner's almost ready. I don't think your dad is joining us. He's not feeling well and says he's probably not going to work today. Hey, can you do me a favor and take the trash out? I know he'd appreciate it." I looked at the bag of trash and felt my belly squirm. I'd have to cross the blacktop to get to the dumpster, and it would be dark out there now. There were no lights out on the blacktop, and other than the lights in the parking lot, it would be very dark out there. I was less afraid of the dark by this point and more afraid of the blacktop. Would it disappear me too, like it had done to Randall? I didn't know, but I couldn't refuse without giving my mom a pretty good reason why. I grabbed the bag and set out across the blacktop, wanting to be done with it as quickly as possible. The court seemed to stretch on forever in the dark, the black asphalt feeling strange underfoot without the sun overhead. I passed Randall's outline, and the sight of it gave me a shiver. It felt like looking at a dead body, and I wanted to go far around it when I came back. I couldn't help but look at the ribbon of comic characters Mimi and I had done, but they looked different in the low light cast by the parking lot overheads. Were they moving? They looked like they were moving, but it was in that way that things move when you look at them for too long. They moved in that dreamy way that things move on hot days, and it was hard to tell what was happening. I was breathing very hard. I felt like I might hyperventilate, and I needed to get home before I collapsed. I didn't want to stick around long enough to find out what could be happening out here. I tossed the bag into the dumpster, my ordeal half over, but it wasn't over yet. I came back to the edge of the blacktop, and that's when I saw the hopscotch board. It was massive, stretching all the way back from one end to the other, and on a whim, I decided to jump over the square in front of me. It wasn't a big jump, but I must have come down wrong because my heel fell inside the square, and suddenly I lost my balance. I spun my arms trying to right myself, and luckily I fell left instead of back. I hissed as I skinned my elbow on the pavement, but that wasn't the weirdest part. I looked down to find my leg dipping into the box that had been chalked into the pavement, and I breathed a sigh of relief when I pulled it out. I was scared now. I started running as I tried to make it back home. I didn't know what was happening, but I wanted to feel safe again. Home was safe. Nothing could get you at home, but as I passed the ribbon of characters, I saw that I hadn't been mistaken earlier. They were moving, reaching for me with their oddly defined limbs, and the dinosaur that I had drawn was snapping his jaws at me as it glowered. They were moving painfully slow across the blacktop, coming for me, and I jumped over them as I kept running. They were too slow to get me, and I was too scared to slow down. As I passed by the outline of Randall, I thought I heard someone softly crying and felt the dread rise up inside me like a tide. I came barreling into the apartment, crying and yelling for my mother to help me. She wrapped me in a hug, asking what was wrong as she tried to calm me down. I must have been pretty loud because my sick father came staggering out of the bedroom to ask what was wrong. Mom clearly couldn't get anything coherent out of me, so after trying in vain to get me to eat dinner, she just put me to bed and lay with me as Dad went back to bed. Later that evening, someone called Mom, and she got up to take the call in the other room. I was supposed to be asleep, but couldn't help but hear when she talked to Randall's mother about how he hadn't come home yet. His mother must have been pretty worried, because I heard my mom telling Mrs. Gaff that she was sure that he was just at someone's house, and she'd find him any minute now. I yawned, drifting off as I hoped it would all turn out to be a dream. I woke up the next morning to find police scouring the area and asking everyone about the 2 missing kids. Kelsey, as it turned out, hadn't just gone home, and I now felt pretty sure that she had fallen into the hopscotch board, like I had almost done the night before. They asked me if I knew what had happened to my friends, and I told them I didn't know where they had gone. I told them I had seen them on the blacktop the day before, and when I turned back to point at it, I saw that all the drawings were gone. One of the maintenance guys had probably seen our mess and used a hose to clean it up. It was all gone. Even the outline of Randall was gone. No one ever found a trace of Randall or Kelsey, and my parents moved away not long after. Mom got a promotion at work, and Dad got a different job that paid better and let him work a 9-to-5, so he'd be home nights. They said the neighborhood seemed less safe after the 2 kids went missing, and they were worried that I might go missing too. A lot of people left after that, actually, and I heard that the apartment complex almost closed. I never saw the blacktop again after that, but I still dream about it sometimes. I'm older now. I know that people don't just disappear into chalk drawings, but if it's just a dream, then why do I remember it so vividly?
And just like that, it appears our stories have come to an end for another day. Don't worry, though. We'll be back again sometime with more cozy horror with yours truly, Dr. Plague. Until then, this is Dr. Plague wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.